I had never been treated that way in my life. At 74, I'd seen my fair share of ups and downs, but nothing quite like this. It was supposed to be a simple errand, drop off some papers, grab some coffee, but as soon as I entered that precinct, I could tell something wasn't right. I shuffled in, my cane tapping lightly on the floor. The officers behind the counter didn't seem to notice me at first, too busy chatting among themselves. I waited, hoping someone would acknowledge me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I need some help with my paperwork." One of the officers, a young guy with a shaved head, looked me up and down, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Yeah. What's your business here, old man?" His tone was dripping with sarcasm. I felt my pulse quicken, but I held my ground. "I'm a veteran," I said, my voice just a bit louder now, my pride shining through. "I've served my country, and I just need some help with this." The officer's smirk didn't fade. "Veteran, huh? Maybe you should go to a VA office for this," he said, not even bothering to get up. Another officer, taller and with a rough, unshaven face, glanced over. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, clearly uninterested. They made no move to assist me, just continued their conversation, dismissing me like I didn't matter. But something in me snapped. I wasn't some elderly man to be brushed aside, not after everything I'd done for this country. I didn't know it then, but the moment I walked into that precinct, my life would change in ways I couldn't have imagined. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the officers go about their business, completely ignoring me. My patience was wearing thin, but I refused to leave without getting what I came for. I had earned my right to be treated with dignity. After another minute of waiting, I cleared my throat. "I don't mean to be a burden, but I really need some assistance. It's important." The taller officer finally looked up, eyes narrowing as he scanned me from head to toe. "You need assistance, huh? Maybe you're just lost." His voice was condescending, but it was the look in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. There was a mocking sense of superiority there, as if he couldn't fathom that someone like me could be demanding his attention. "You're really going to ignore me like this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rising anger in my chest. "Maybe we'll call someone who actually cares about your paperwork," the officer said with a sneer. I knew right then that this wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about power. Power that they were trying to assert over someone they thought was easy to push around. I wasn't going to back down. But before I could say another word, the door to the back of the precinct slammed open with such force that it rattled the windows. Everyone in the room went quiet. Two men, sharply dressed in suits, walked in with purpose. Their presence was commanding, their expressions unreadable. They didn't look like ordinary officers. No, these men had the kind of authority that made the entire room feel smaller. One of the officers behind the desk shifted uncomfortably. "What's going on here?" he asked, but his voice cracked under the pressure. The men didn't respond immediately. They glanced around the precinct, their eyes sharp and calculating. Then, one of them finally spoke, his voice cold and stern. "We've been made aware of an incident involving a veteran here. We're here to handle it." The tension in the room skyrocketed. The officers at the desk stiffened, clearly uneasy with the unexpected arrival of these two men. I could see it in their faces, something had changed in the air, and they didn't like it. The men in suits were no longer just a disruption. They were here for something more. One of the suited men, tall with dark hair and a calm demeanor, turned to the officer who had been dismissive toward me. "You'll come with us," he said, his voice low but commanding. "We need to have a conversation about how you've been treating the people who walk through these doors." The officer looked like he wanted to argue but quickly swallowed the words. Instead, he shot a glance at his partner, who seemed equally baffled by the situation. Neither of them moved. "Now," the suited man added, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "We don't have time for games. I watched as the officers reluctantly rose from their chairs, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. They didn't seem to know who these men were, but they knew enough to recognize that they were not the kind of people you crossed. The second man, shorter but just as intense, pulled out a badge from his jacket pocket, revealing a gold emblem that glinted in the harsh light of the precinct. FBI, he said briefly, not waiting for anyone to respond. You'll follow us to the back, and we'll discuss the actions that brought you to our attention. The entire room was silent now. The officers, once brash and dismissive, looked like they were shrinking under the weight of the situation. It was clear they didn't expect anyone to care about a veteran walking in for paperwork, let alone have the FBI show up at their door. "Is this really necessary?" one of the officers mumbled, his voice barely audible. "You'll find out soon enough," the man with the badge replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. I stood there, still gripping my cane, watching it all unfold. I felt a surge of satisfaction, but also a sense of unease. I didn't know why the FBI was here, but I had a feeling I wasn't going to have to fight for my dignity any longer. The suited men led the officers to the back of the precinct, where the interrogation room doors closed behind them. I was left standing in the lobby, the tension in the air still thick, like the calm before a storm. I didn't know what was happening next, but I was certain that this day wasn't going to end quietly. I stood in that lobby for what felt like an eternity, wondering what exactly the FBI had in mind. The sound of muffled voices filtered through the thin walls at the back of the precinct. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, intense, confrontational, urgent. The longer it went on, the more my anxiety grew, though I couldn't deny a strange satisfaction as well. I'd never been the kind of person who sat idly by while being mistreated. Years of service, sacrifice, and seeing things most people could never imagine had given me a thick skin. But still, I hadn't expected things to escalate like this. The idea that someone, let alone the FBI, was taking my side made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. The door to the back suddenly opened with a creak, and the two suited men emerged, their expressions unreadable. They walked toward me without saying a word, the officers from the desk following them, their postures stiff, like they were walking to their doom. "You're free to go," the man with the dark hair said to me, his voice calm but firm. He looked over at the officers as he spoke, his eyes filled with a quiet warning. "We'll be in touch. Don't expect this to be over." I didn't need to hear anything else. I was already halfway out the door before the officer who had been so rude to me earlier opened his mouth. "What happens now?" the officer asked, his voice shaky. "You'll find out soon enough," the shorter FBI agent replied, his eyes cold. He turned to the others. "We'll be filing a full report. You may want to reconsider your actions before we reach out to your superiors." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, and I could see their hands trembling, their earlier bravado completely gone. The situation had shifted, and they knew it. As I stepped outside into the bright afternoon light, the air felt different, fresher, cleaner. The weight of the past few minutes seemed to lift, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. I had no idea what the FBI would do next, but I knew one thing for sure: they wouldn't let this go. I glanced up at the sky, the sunlight warm on my face. The world had felt so small inside that precinct, so suffocating. But now, as I stepped away, I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe things would be different from here on out. The days ahead wouldn't be easy. But they would be fair. And that was something I hadn't had in a long time. The next few days passed in a blur, each moment heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was brewing. The officers who had mistreated me hadn't spoken a word to me after that encounter, but I could feel their eyes on me when I passed by. They no longer had that smirk, that air of superiority, they were just trying to keep their heads down. But I wasn't the only one who knew the truth now. Word had spread fast about what had happened at the precinct. By the time I walked into a local diner for coffee, whispers filled the air. The regulars, who had once greeted me with friendly nods, now turned away, eyes flicking nervously toward the door as I entered. It was clear, things were shifting, and everyone felt it. I was no longer just an old veteran trying to get his paperwork done. I was the reason things were about to change. The phone calls started that afternoon. A woman from the local news station reached out first. "We're hearing reports about an incident at the precinct," she said, her voice tentative but inquisitive. "Can you confirm what happened? We've been given a lot of conflicting stories." I wasn't one for the limelight. Hell, I never wanted attention. But there was something about her voice, a quiet desperation for the truth, that made me pause. I told her everything, about the officers, the way they dismissed me, and about the FBI showing up. She listened carefully, asking the occasional question, but never interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear her processing it all. "We'll be running a story," she said finally. "Expect to hear from us again soon. This could change things." As soon as we hung up, another call came through, this time from someone who said they were with the FBI. "We're following up on the incident. We need you to come down to the office for a formal statement." I didn't hesitate. Whatever was coming, I knew I couldn't back down now. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by the same two suited men from the precinct. They led me into a quiet room and asked me to sit at a table. The taller one took a seat across from me and spoke calmly. "We're building a case against the officers involved in your mistreatment. It's not just about the incident with you, but about their history of behavior. We've been gathering evidence." He paused, studying me. "We need your statement to move forward." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't have to think about it. I had already decided, I wouldn't let them get away with it. I told them everything again, only this time I added the little details I had almost forgotten, the way their eyes had looked at me like I didn't matter, the way they mocked me without saying a word. The more I spoke, the more the weight of it all lifted from my shoulders. I was finally being heard. The man with the dark hair smiled slightly. "This is going to be important. Thank you for your courage. We'll keep you updated as the investigation progresses." I left that office with a sense of resolve. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like justice was on the horizon. The next few days felt surreal. As the news spread, it seemed like everyone had something to say about what had happened at the precinct. I'd seen a few reports on the local news about the incident, but nothing concrete yet. The FBI hadn't released any statements, and the officers involved hadn't been suspended or reprimanded, at least, not publicly. But I could tell things were different now. The way people looked at me had changed. Some looked at me with respect, as if they saw me in a new light. Others seemed distant, almost uncomfortable, as if they weren't sure how to handle the situation. I was in the grocery store one afternoon when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mr. Harrison." I turned to find one of the officers who had been involved in the whole ordeal standing there, his eyes nervous, avoiding direct eye contact. It was the younger one, the one who had first mocked me in the precinct. I could see his posture was different now, less arrogant, more apologetic. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We weren't thinking clearly. It's been rough, with everything that's come out. We never meant to treat you that way." I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to call him out, to remind him of how he treated me that day. But another part of me recognized something in his face, guilt. He didn't seem like the same person who had dismissed me so easily. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about him, it was about a system that had failed him as much as it had failed me. "You can't undo what happened," I said quietly. "But you've got a chance to make it right. It's on you now." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I know," he muttered. "I'll do better. I swear." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the aisles of the store. I watched him go, not sure what to make of it. Was this genuine remorse, or just a man trying to save his own skin. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that he knew. And I knew. The next day, things took a turn I hadn't expected. The FBI called again, but this time it wasn't just a follow-up. It was serious. "We've got some news," the voice on the other end said. "We've gathered enough evidence to file charges against the officers. We're also looking into several other incidents they've been involved in. This is bigger than just what happened to you." I felt a rush of relief mixed with a lingering anxiety. I hadn't expected things to move this fast. "What's going to happen next?" "We'll need you to testify. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The weight of it all hit me in that moment. Testifying was a big step, something I hadn't considered before. But it was also a necessary one. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for anyone who had ever been brushed aside, anyone who had ever been treated like they didn't matter. I took a deep breath. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll testify." The days that followed felt like a strange blur. I spent more time than I ever expected talking to investigators, reviewing the case details, and preparing for what was coming next. Testifying wasn't something I had ever imagined myself doing. But there I was, having to stand up and be a voice for something much bigger than me. The FBI made it clear, this wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern of behavior, officers who had a history of mistreating people, especially those they saw as easy targets. People who were vulnerable, who didn't have the means or the power to fight back. When the day of the hearing arrived, I wasn't sure what to expect. The courthouse was packed with people, but it wasn't the crowd that intimidated me, it was the weight of the moment. I had never been in a courtroom before, let alone as a witness. But today, I wasn't just a bystander in this story. I was part of it. I sat in the witness box, staring straight ahead, trying to block out the nervous buzz of activity all around me. The defense team was sitting across from me, their eyes sharp, focused. They were ready to tear into my testimony, no doubt hoping to discredit me. But I wasn't going to let that happen. The prosecutor called me to the stand. As I walked up, my hands were steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. I was no stranger to adversity, but this felt different. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was standing up for anyone who had been mistreated, anyone who had been overlooked by a system that was supposed to protect them. The prosecutor introduced me, and the room grew silent. I took a deep breath, then I began. "I'm here today to tell you what happened to me," I started, my voice firm, clear. "But this isn't just about me. This is about a pattern. A culture of disrespect. A culture that punishes people for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A culture that thinks they can get away with it because they believe no one will stand up." I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The jury was watching closely, their faces unreadable, but I could see the attention in their eyes. They were listening. I walked into that precinct, and I was treated like I didn't matter. Like I wasn't even a person. But I am. And I'm not the only one. The defense attorney stood up immediately, objecting, but the judge waved him off. I wasn't saying anything that wasn't true. I continued, detailing what had happened, how they had dismissed me, how they had mocked me and treated me like I wasn't worth the effort. And when the FBI had arrived, I realized that this wasn't just a matter of personal insult, it was a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. When I finished my statement, there was a brief, tense silence. The defense had no immediate response. The evidence was too clear, and they knew it. They tried to argue that I was overreacting, but their objections were weak. The case against the officers was strong, and I had just made it stronger. As I walked off the stand, I felt a sense of relief mixed with uncertainty. The battle wasn't over yet. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something that mattered. The trial stretched on for weeks, but the tide had already turned in our favor. The evidence was mounting, and the defense had no solid ground to stand on. The officers who had mistreated me were beginning to crack under the pressure, and it was clear that their actions were not isolated incidents. They had been part of a broader issue, one that had gone unchecked for far too long. Finally, the day came when the jury was ready to deliberate. I waited in the hallway, trying to keep my nerves in check. I couldn't help but think back to that day at the precinct, the way they had belittled me, the way they had treated me like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The court reconvened, and I took my seat with the rest of the plaintiffs, my heart racing in my chest. The foreman of the jury stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty of misconduct, abuse of power, and civil rights violations. A weight lifted off my shoulders. The officers were going to be held accountable for their actions. The justice I had been fighting for was finally within reach. The room erupted into murmurs, but I just sat there, trying to process what I was hearing. For the first time, I felt the weight of my service as a veteran truly pay off, not in medals or accolades, but in this moment of justice. The officers involved were sentenced to disciplinary action and faced the consequences of their actions. They were stripped of their badges, and the police department underwent an internal review to address the systemic issues that had led to this point. But what really mattered was that I had stood up. I had fought back against the system that had tried to silence me. And I wasn't the only one. This case had sparked a movement, a push for reform, a demand for accountability that rippled through the department and beyond. I left the courthouse that day, my head held high, knowing that I had done the right thing. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had changed for the better, and I had played a small but crucial role in that. I wasn't just a veteran anymore. I wasn't just a victim of mistreatment. I was a voice for justice. And no one could take that away from me.